This is Ron Langer for GrassRoots TV in Aspen, Colorado. I'm interviewing George F. Evseeff, E-V-S-E-E-F-F, who lives in Basalt, Colorado. Dr. Evseeff was born in Harbin, Manchuria, H-A-R-B-I-N, in April 9th, 1919. Served with the U.S. Army 178th Combat Engineers Battalion, which was attached to General Patton's Third Army. He received the rank of Major and served from January 1st of 44 through August 31st, 1946 in the European Theater of Operations. George, I'd like to start out by talking about your childhood a little bit. You have kind of an interesting history. Your father was part of the Russian Army, the White Russian Army, which fled from Russia during the Russian Revolution and ended up in Manchuria. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the Russian Revolution was followed by Russian Civil War, which started in 1919, the year I was born, following the massacre of Tsar Nicholas II and his family. So my father was attached to Admiral Kolchak's army, which was pushed through Siberia and finally escaped from the Bolsheviks, better known as communist armies, into Manchuria, where a lot of Russian emigres moved and settled there. And that's where I was born and lived and attended Russian high school, from which I graduated, and in 1936.
So it was a Russian culture there in China.
That's right. Yeah.
And the city had actually been leased from China for a 100-year lease.
The territory. The city was built actually by Russians. They started building Harbin in 1899 as a railroad station, part of Trans-Siberian Railroad, which at that time had to go through that portion of Manchuria because they couldn't do much to put it further north. It was taiga, it was a difficult area to work on a railroad.
What was it like then growing up in Harbin? I mean, did it feel like a part of Russia?
Yes, we had Russian high schools, Russian police, mostly former Cossacks who became policemen.
Right.
And streets were named after various Russian poets, writers, all written in Russian. But we were surrounded outskirts where Chinese residents who moved in because they could get jobs was the Russian enterprises. Most of the Russians who moved there were educated, had some so-called white Russians who were persecuted by the Bolsheviks, so we had well-known artists, writers, besides the military people. And so they started a community of their own, which grew and prospered and did well until World War II, until actually the Japanese occupied, but they allowed Russians to stay there.
Yeah. So the Japanese occupation took place in 1932. And how did that change your living conditions then?
somewhat because of restrictions as far as getting imports from other countries, which affected my father's business because he depended on tobacco, which they couldn't grow tobacco in Manchuria. It was too far up north, and the temperatures there were very cold, 40 degrees in the wintertime, in January below zero, so on. So it affected our financial base somewhat, I mean my father's base. And food imports were limited. You know, we used to get nice chocolates from Switzerland and whatnot, but that all stopped during that time.
So how was it that you left Harbin?
Well, my father primarily foresaw what was coming in terms of Japanese expansion, and he wanted to get me out of there because he foresaw that there would be a major battle with China, which occurred later. So in 1936 I was able to leave Manchuria through the aid of my father's good friend, who was an American representative of International YMCA, who was a friend of the American consul who was in Harbin. So I was able to obtain a student's visa to come to the United States. And the reason I went to Michigan is because Mr. Haig, my father's friend, was born and raised in Michigan and had some friends who helped me to get started in the United States, working at YMCA, living at the YMCA in Grand Rapids, working there, going to school. I started with a community college there, which used to be called junior college, and then transferred to, after 2 years, to University of Michigan, and was accepted in medical school. And that's where my medical career began. And then Pearl Harbor came along, and myself and some of my friends promptly volunteered to join the United States Army. We were told to wait until we finished the school.
Until you finished medical school?
Finished medical school, because they needed medical officers more than they needed infantrymen.
Sure. This is making a little noise here.
Okay, well, so do you want me to continue?
Yes, please.
Sure. After that, I finished my 9 months internship instead of a year's internship. That was wartime regulation. And
so they abbreviated the internship because they needed to get doctors on the front lines.
As soon as they could, yes.
Yeah.
So I got orders immediately to report to active duty in an Army medical training camp in Pittsburgh. And from there, it's like basic training, cadet training, about 6 weeks, 4 weeks, I forget, somewhere between.
Where they were teaching you basic military skills.
That's right. Articles of war, how to march, how to give orders, and that kind of stuff. Physical training. Then was transferred to Brooke General Hospital in Sam Houston, San Antonio, where I got special training as a battalion surgeon for 6 weeks. And then I was transferred.
That strikes me as being a very short time to learn the skills that you would need as a battalion surgeon.
Extremely, extremely short. And it is, I was going to digress for a moment.
Yeah.
It was very difficult because I really didn't have much training, as you can imagine, 6 weeks. And then to be placed in charge and responsible for medical care and the care of the wounded without any kind of supervision. I ended up as being a battalion surgeon. It was this combat unit in the 3rd Army. We had a strength of about 700 to 800 men, and I remember having to report written reports every month, every 2 months, to Surgeon General in Washington, D.C. in terms of what we were doing, how we were doing, etc. But
So were you the only physician assigned to this battalion?
yes, I was in charge of a medical detachment, which consisted of about, varied between 50 and 20 men. I was a first lieutenant, and under me was a captain, which made me uncomfortable. But that's how the Army is. The captain was the dentist. So medical officers had a kind of top dog situation as far as command was concerned. And he was somewhat difficult person at times to deal with because he was scared to, more often than not, when we were in, under fire or in combat duties. So he didn't stay sober very often, and I had to take care of medical and dental problems most good share of the time. But
was there some resentment that you, as a first lieutenant, was in charge, was over a captain?
I don't think so.
No. It was more his fear.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was the predominant factor. I didn't. Then I was promoted during combat to a rank of captain, and I didn't. And that was what should have been to begin with.
Right.
That's how.
Yeah. Let's back up a minute. What kind of skills did they teach you at Brooke Army Medical Center?
Well, there were a combination, turned out to be a medical and surgical wards that I served on, helping during surgeries as assistant, watching. And they did routine stuff over there, of course, because it was in the States here. It was
Yes.
appendectomies and that kind of stuff, occasionally broken bones, but not much of that, which was so different from what, of course, we encountered once we got into combat. There were mostly open wounds, broken bones, fractures, people in state of shock. They did teach us about treating shock, of course.
Yes.
And controlling hemorrhages and stuff like that.
Yeah. So your training was pretty basic, given the responsibilities that you were then assigned to once you got into combat.
Yes.
Yeah.
I only wished I had more training.
Yeah. Right. Now, when did you arrive in Europe?
In the summer of, I believe it was end of July, maybe first part of August of 1944.
So it would have been a couple of months after D-Day.
Right.
And did you go over with this engineering battalion, or were they already over there?
They were already on their way. I was part of we used to call it a replacement package.
Yeah.
So I was supposed to replace medical but combat personnel when needed, and the medical officer, battalion surgeon, whom I replaced in our battalion, had a nervous breakdown after they crossed the, I think they came on the Utah beachhead, and I was shipped over through Omaha beachhead. So I replaced him, and he was shipped out. That's how I ended up being with 178th Battalion.
And you met up with them while they were still in France?
Yes. Just before, as they were arriving to Nancy, I think, city, which is south of, a little east of Paris.
Okay. So could you describe for us what conditions were like when you first arrived there?
In terms of?
Well, in terms of what was happening day to day? I mean, were you under fire at all? Was your unit in active combat, and you were behind the lines taking care of injuries? What was a day, everyday experience like?
Well, once we left Nancy, which was a matter of days, we moved forward, trying to pursue retreating German troops, which did not put up much resistance at all. Some of them surrendered, some of them just kept moving, running, took some prisoners. We didn't really encounter much resistance until we got to Moselle River, and from that point on, it was around September the 1st that we started to catch flak and some serious kind of resistance. We did, our battalion, by the way, built a bridge across Moselle River in regular kind of bridge.
Yes.
In 7 days. According to records we obtained, a similar type of a bridge was built by Germans, but it took them 28 days. It took us only 7 days. But that was a rarity because most of the time we were involved in clearing the minefields, which were present around Moselle River area, so that the tanks could proceed. We were usually operated in front of the tanks of General Patton's force, mostly 4, 6 armored divisions, and removed any road obstacles and helped the tanks to cross the rivers. Of course, the main crossings were eventually Rhine River crossing, but Moselle River was an important point where we had to get the tanks across the river.
What kind of equipment did an engineering battalion use to do that mine clearing?
Well, we have special trained squads which had mine detectors, and they just dug them up as they detected the mines. They were basically pretty primitive, you know, mine detectors.
So it wasn't like you had large front loaders. I picture like a large piece of construction equipment that they would move in, but that wasn't the case. They actually sent people in with mine detectors.
Right. We had some of those. We got some more equipment-wise, small bulldozers. By the time we eventually got to Siegfried Line, defending Germany along the Rhine River, and that's where we used them on occasions when necessary around Siegfried Line to move in and push the dirt against the pillboxes where German guns were emplacements, where machine guns and so on.
What was the purpose of pushing dirt against the pillboxes?
So they wouldn't fire at us.
Oh, okay.
It was very dangerous duty. We had, the drivers had shields in front of them with a little opening so they could see where they were going. And there were a number of incidents where, or one incident that stands out in my mind.
Yes.
One man, one of our companies, refused to get in a bulldozer and move on because the Germans were already firing at us. Small arms fire, but it was fire. And the captain, I won't mention his name, he's long dead now, ordered him. He refused, so he took out his .45 pistol and whipped him with it. And finally the guy got in a bulldozer and went ahead, survived, with bad bruises that I had to take care of afterwards. Facial bruises. I think he had a fractured maxillary bone and some other injuries. But that's the rough part of the war.
Mm-hmm.
So we also had some other heavy equipment, which the big trucks, 2.5-ton trucks,
Mm-hmm.
had some, mostly small bulldozers,
Mm-hmm.
one operator type. We had also boats, what we called storm boats for crossing rivers, but we didn't use them until Rhine crossings. They were equipped with outboard motors,
Mm-hmm.
and they were able of traveling 40 miles an hour.
Wow.
And transported infantry troops. That was our assignment across Rhine River. The big one was around Oppenheim, where we visited, my wife Nancy and I, a few years ago. General Patton made his famous statement about peeing in the Rhine River, being the first GI.
You want to hold this up so we can
Yes.
get it? And describe this photograph to us.
It's on a floating Bailey bridge. It's Bailey like liquor, Bailey, Irish Bailey. Once it was placed and Germans were pushed back by the infantry that was already across the Rhine River that we took across in our storm boats. And General Patton arrived when the bridge was finished, and he went out in the middle, and as shown in the picture, he whipped out, you know what, and urinated in the Rhine River, saying, "I'm the first goddamn GI who's going to pee in this river." That's typical General Patton's way of addressing his troops.
Yes, right. Right. Yeah, he was teaching by example.
That's right.
Describe in more detail what happened when you reached the Rhine River, because that was the crossing that that everybody dreaded.
Yes.
And the Germans were determined not to let it happen because that was the beginning of the end for them.
That's right.
What do you remember from when you first got to the Rhine River?
Well, my memories go to Bingen am Rhein. It's a small town, B-I-N-G-N, Bingen. Tried crossing there. There was too much artillery fire from the other side. Germans were throwing a lot of 88s. 88 shells were the most common weaponry that they used. And we were hiding. Our so-called first aid station was set up in a building which we had to quickly evacuate because it collapsed shortly after we got out of that building due to the shell fire. I had a little dog we picked up somewhere, got buried in that building. That was an upsetting experience. Then, of course, we had some casualties there. Tried crossing at Bingen, couldn't do it. Tried crossing at Rohr, R-O-H-R. That didn't work because of enemy fire, in spite of the fact that we had a good air support from the, I think it was 8th Air Force that gave us tactical support, but still they were pretty well entrenched, and finally succeeded at Oppenheim. That was March 28th and through March 30th that we were able to put up this Bailey floating bridge, and which the main reason was so we could get the tanks across the Rhine River, because we already got infantry over the 87th, units of the 87th Infantry Division, 89th Infantry Division. Those were the two divisions.
And they were taken over there in the boats.
Our boats, yeah, storm boats. Then Navy came in shortly thereafter. I don't remember exactly how many days, but there were bigger boats so they could take more troops across.
Yeah.
That's the first time we saw Navy after landing in England, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Approximately how wide is the Rhine River at that point?
Maybe I have to ask my wife. She was there when we visited Oppenheim. I don't know. I would say about quarter of a mile.
So it's a pretty significant
Yeah.
distance to
Yes.
to bridge, and it must be a fairly massive bridge to be able to take tanks.
Yes, it's heavy.
Yeah.
We worked around the clock for about 2 days
Yeah.
under fire.
Hmm.
Some fire, mostly small arms fire, because we already were able to get rid of some of those heavier artillery pieces the Germans had, thanks to our Air Force.
Now, what was your work schedule like as a surgeon during that time?
Primarily was to, when the casualties were incurred, to make sure that the hemorrhage was stopped, that they were not going to shock, make decisions whether it was a light wound that could be treated, so to speak, locally on the
Yes.
spot, or something that required evacuation, which always was a problem because we didn't have any ambulances. We only had jeeps. We had no helicopters like they did in Vietnam. So evacuation was mostly done by jeeps and half tracks, stuff
And then
like that.
they would be taken to an
Collecting
airfield?
station. Collecting stations.
Collecting station.
Collecting stations. And from there they were taken to field hospitals, which were many miles back of us, you know. I never saw a nurse during all this combat air duty lasting from whatever, August through May almost of.
Because the nurses were back in the field hospital.
Field hospitals is the first place that we know
Right.
of. So it was a matter of mostly making decisions, and of course I had trained medical technicians who helped to start. We didn't have blood, of course. We had plasma, we had morphine, we had some sulfa, lots of bandages, lots of decision making in terms of, is this guy going to, and of course we had some casualties which we knew are not going to survive. It's just they were so badly injured that we just had to keep them comfortable as we could. And there again, the problem was we didn't, being so close to the front line, we didn't have any tents, or we just found abandoned buildings or any kind of a structures where we could open up our cases with medical supplies, work by the side of our vehicles and so on.
What do you say to someone who you know is going to die?
Well, we usually said, we're going to do what we can, you're going to be all right. We usually didn't try to tell them, you know, you're going to die or anything of the sort. We did not have any priests or anybody to administer the last rites, you know. It usually was done somewhere back of us, not so close to the front line. As you may know, this is the last time in World War II that they used medical officers like myself in truly frontline duty. After that, they just had medical corpsmen who just evacuated casualties, and like in Vietnam or even in Korea, so they could evacuate them quicker and not lose so many people. My best friend, I was best man at his wedding just before we were shipped out. He was also shipped out to Europe. He was my medical school classmate, and he was my roommate. And so naturally, before we were shipped out, he made a bad decision to get married, got his wife pregnant. He ended up on Omaha Beachhead, a little ahead of me, and he was killed in frontline duty. The other good friend of mine, I attended his wedding in a chicken coop in Alabama. We were stationed there for a while before being shipped out again to Europe. I never saw again until we liberated that German prisoner of war camp where he was taken prisoner very shortly after Normandy beachhead. Spent the rest of the war in a prison camp. And when we entered the camp, he walked towards me. I didn't recognize him because he lost so much weight. They didn't had very good treatment in a German camp. He recognized me and put his arms around me, you know. I have a hard time sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that must have been a very emotional greeting.
Yeah. That and losing Jimmy, my roommate, you know.
Yeah.
But you see, we lost those people who could have been used better somewhere else, back of the front line duties.
Yeah. So that change in policy really made sense.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
They didn't. Certainly didn't use frontline medical officers in Korea, as you know, from the MASH.
Right.
They were more like collecting stations and field hospitals. Nor in Vietnam. It's mostly helicopter evacuation.
You want to take a sip of water?
Yes. Speaking of this, near Oppenheim River Rhine crossing too.
Yes.
There was a man in my detachment who used to cut my hair. My wife cuts my hair now. And I was very fond of him, and he was a good, what would you say, hairdresser.
Yeah. Good barber.
Barber. And he had to get in a storm boat crossing the Rhine River, and they got hit by a German, must have been probably 88 shell. And right in front of him, I was on the bank there, saw the boat go down, and that was very upsetting to see somebody that you like, you're close to, and right in front of your eyes go down. Of course, never was recovered. I mean, they all died in that boat.
Yeah. I noticed when you talked about losing that dog, that was an emotional experience for you too. The dog that was that died in the
building
when the building collapsed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, dog, you kind of try to, I'm not sure how to explain it, to have some kind of a emotional attachment to something that is part of your normal life. Dogs are. I was raised with dogs, always loved dogs. And it was a stray dog we picked up somewhere and just carried along. It was a small dog, a mutt. And myself and other guys in the detachment, took care of it and were fond of it.
Yeah.
It was like, what would you call those dogs that serve as a...
like a therapy dog?
Yeah, something like that,
Yeah.
And they respond to your care, and they're meaningful.
Yeah. I imagine that that's one of the hardest things about combat is getting attached to a person or an animal, and then losing it.
Yes.
These are experiences that lead military people to become detached from their emotions, and I know that your later career was in psychiatry, but that leads to post-traumatic stress disorder. That it just becomes a defense, that you just don't allow yourself to love because of the profound losses that you've experienced.
You become numb.
You become numb.
Numb.
Yeah.
And some bad dreams.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any other observations about that topic?
about, well, what I remember so well, people actually breaking down almost in front of your eyes, the acute phase, let's say, of the post-traumatic stress disorder. What I mean by acute, that suddenly a person starts crying and shaking so severely that they cannot hold their gun or rifle. Only later we start hearing about the bad dreams or the numbness and various psychosomatic kind of symptoms that occur, which are problematic. Like I remember a number of cases of men who had diarrhea. They were so scared, you know, that they couldn't control their bowels. And then, of course, it's a problem. They're on frontline duty. They got a duty. They got to work with all that soiled clothing, and, you know, and then they're shaking. And what do you do with them, you know?
How did you treat those acute stress responses, as we call them now?
Well, mostly reassurance, gave them some, we had phenobarbital, gave them a lot of sedatives that we had, mostly, as I say, mostly barbiturates, you know, that's all we had.
So they could get some sleep?
So they get some sleep, tried to get them away from the front line as much as we could, or as far as we could, and try to keep them in line of duty. Because a lot of men didn't really want to leave their units because they would get lost, you know, on replacement pools, and then you never know who you're going to be with, which unit, and so on. You know, that was a major problem. A lot of people who were wounded, they wanted to be treated by me so they wouldn't have to be shipped out. But you know, that's a difficult decision again to make, because it's not necessarily in their best interest from a medical standpoint to have them stay with the unit when they should be evacuated.
And so those were difficult decisions that you had to make every day.
Yes.
One of the principles that I've heard about treating acute trauma among frontline troops is that they need to realize that they will be sent back to the front lines. That if they don't have an expectation that they're going to go back, then they often get worse.
Yeah.
Was that something that you experienced?
Some of it, yes. Yeah. There were some who were glad that they were injured and wounded or sick, hoping they wouldn't have to go back. Right. And there was another bunch who were apprehensive about being shipped out, because there was certain camaraderie, certain kind of bonds established. And I remember one of my close buddies and friends who, to him, it was more important, and he was mildly injured, to stay with the unit, you know. And I could have shipped him out, but he pleaded with me not to. It was more important to be with the group in spite of the danger and all the problems, you know, of combat duties.
Because of the bonds that he had established.
I think that was very important.
Right.
I have my staff sergeant who was very helpful, and I just met him when I joined the 178th Battalion. The bond still exists. I just talked to him last week. I sent him birthday cards, holiday cards. I just found out he's about my age. He has a lung cancer, and I'm kind of upset about that. And then, you know, it's something that becomes established and it doesn't break down. It stays with you. I mean, we don't talk very often, but we're close, you know. There's something that he feels and I do, that we saw, lived through experiences, some big, some little ones. Like I remember I was asleep, tired. He was shaking me, waking me up. He just found out that President Roosevelt died.
Yeah.
And we were all quite upset about that, you know, because a lot of people, at least in my outfit, were all admiring of him, you know, and it was quite an experience to find out that he died, you know, who's going to be next president, what's going to be like, you know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. There was a lot of confidence that people
That's
had
right.
in Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Your description of that, of the bonds that get forged in combat, I think is a really important point. That it's unique. I mean, there's nothing quite as close as that, is there? That connection that's forged in going through those kinds of experiences together.
That's true. For one reason, main reason I think is that we face death and injuries, potential injuries and death, and see other people die, and it somehow we feel certain emotions together in common. The survivor's guilt, for example. Well,
Yes.
you know, my buddy Andy was knocked off, killed. I survived, and you see that happen again and again. And somehow that also becomes an element, like with my close friend Leon. We survived, and we went through this kind of experience together. The only other close, not the same experience, going through medical school, close friends, college, bonds, but
Yeah.
that's different. It's not quite the same, although it's also a bond of sorts.
Yeah.
We suffer through final exams and wonder if we passed or not, and all the rest that goes along, you know, is going to college. But this is different.
Yeah, and it's a lifelong thing.
Yes.
And when you heard about your friend's lung cancer, it was obviously very painful.
Yes.
You know, you still had that attachment.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you about another experience. You were attached to the Third Army during the Battle of the Bulge.
Yes.
When the what was it, the 101st Airborne was completely surrounded in Bastogne.
Bastogne, yes, 101st.
Yeah, and so you were with the force that was going in to rescue them, which eventually did rescue them.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
On December 16th of 1944, we were in just inside of Luxembourg, Third Army, our particular unit, and we got orders to move into Bastogne perimeter, we didn't know who was trapped there, we didn't know much of what was going on, except I think we knew it was probably 101st Airborne Division. And we got there, took us about 2 or 3 days to get there. I remember we got into outskirts of Bastogne December 19th of 44. And we also didn't know that we were in the midst of a area where German paratroopers were dropped, and there was a lot of small arms fire. There was a lot of snow that winter in Ardennes forest. That's where it was.
Yes.
And it was very cloudy days, so heavily. I was going to say clouded.
Yeah. It was so socked in.
Socked in. Air Force could not use at all their planes to come in to help us.
Right.
So we were without any kind of air support for several days. And somehow, before this happened, German paratroopers were dropped. So we found ourselves in a position of having to run and hide. And on Christmas Day, which stands out in my mind, I don't remember too much. 2 or 3 days before, we found myself and 2 other men from our unit hiding in a potato cellar in a farm, which was part of a farmhouse deal. And what stood out in my mind quite often comes back. On Christmas Day, we were, of December 25th, 1944, we're eating raw potatoes. There were sacks of potatoes there. That's all we had to eat that day, and the next day we managed to get out of there. We had, of course, our water supply, water bottles with us, so we managed that. But it just stood out as a memorable Christmas day near Bastogne. What was, of course, also difficult during that period and confusing as well, I forget, I think it's whatever number is of that Panzer division that was moved into Bastogne area, which was a German lead armored Panzer division, had several hundred German soldiers who were dressed in American uniforms, who spoke English, who pretended to be American troops, who of course shot and killed our real troops, you know. And we found that out in a hurry. So it was a very, what I call, confusing and difficult time.
And that was coming right after the Malmedy massacre.
Yes.
When a German unit had shot and killed American POWs in cold blood.
Yes, about 100 of them, I think.
100 of them, yeah.
There's only 1 or 2 survivors who told about it. We were just outside of Malmedy when it happened. We didn't know it happened. I didn't know, and my buddies didn't know about that until afterwards.
How did you reconnect with your unit?
Well, our battalion plus whom we were supporting, the 4th Armored and 6th Armored, moved in, and then we, of course, recognized our vehicles, the tanks, and some of our buddies whom we knew, especially in our battalion, men whom we knew. Essentially what happened, myself and about half a dozen of us were kind of lost in the woods in Ardennes forest, and we also found out quickly that here and there were German soldiers, paratroopers, and we had no means to really fight back very well.
Yeah.
So. By the way, this Bronze Star, I got it because I was involved in Bastogne rescue, what we were talking about.
Yes, and you actually have received 3 Bronze Stars.
Yeah, for the other Rhine crossing around Oppenheim and Central Europe. I don't know why, but you know how it is. They tell you that's what you're going to get. And then specifically they put you in for decoration. I also got the French Silver Star. That's another story. It's a Croix de Guerre avec étoile, avec d'argent, or something like that, from General de Gaulle, because we were temporarily attached to 4th Free French Armored Division, which was also part of 3rd Army for a while. And we were helping to clear a minefield for the French armor to move on. And I, as far as I understand, probably that's why I got the Silver Star. I didn't want my men going to take chances of getting injured into minefields, so I took over for a while helping to evacuate a couple of 3 French soldiers who were wounded and were on the ground in a minefield. So I told my men to stay back, and I went over there and dragged one of them back, one of the officers. That's the best I could tell why I got the Silver Star.
And you actually received it directly from General de Gaulle?
Not directly, well, I was apparently reported by the French officer, and I got the medal actually after the war was over, and it was delivered to the commanding officer of the squadron I was attached to after the war was over and after Nuremberg episode. I was with the reconnaissance, 28th Reconnaissance Cavalry Squadron, and they delivered the medal and the citations and all that to him. So in my honor, they had a Sunday morning parade with horses. I was on a horse too. It was a cavalry, but you know, we had armored cavalry, but we had a bunch of captured German horses, military horses that we kept for a while. So that was a big event for me.
Where were you when the war ended?
Not very far from Nuremberg. I don't remember. It's one of my memory problems. Exact town, because it came more or less unexpected. We didn't know when the day would be, that VE Day. I would say near Nuremberg.
What do you remember from hearing about the end of the war?
I primarily remember the massive surrender of German troops. You know, we had thousands of German soldiers who surrendered in the last few days. That was close to the time when we liberated that camp I was talking about near Hammelburg. It's a prisoner of war camp. So we were very happy, but the immediate concern within a matter of days was, I would call it a rumor because I never saw it on paper, that we were going to be shipped to Marseille, France, to go to Pacific Theater, which was pretty unwelcome news, you know. The orders were not issued, but we were alerted that we may be shipped, but it never happened. And you know, Japan surrendered in '45, I think it was.
August of '45.
August of '45, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, but you remained in Europe with the Army of Occupation near Nuremberg for another, what, year or so?
Well, Nuremberg were several months, and then I was assigned to this 28th Cavalry Squadron, reconnaissance squadron, to serve on a border with Czechoslovakia, which that border is not very far from Nuremberg. At that time, the Russian troops were nearby, and I had a dual duty, in effect, because I spoke fluent Russian. I graduated from Russian high school. I served with the S2 section, which is intelligence section, mostly monitoring Russian radio transmissions, to see what's going on across the border there. And at the same time, I was a squadron surgeon. But in the peacetime, I mean, all those guys were young, healthy, handsome, like you are, young men. So there was very little medical care to be administered.
But you had responsibilities for more than just the military personnel. You also had responsibilities for this displaced persons camp, right?
Yes. Primarily, there were so many of them. It was a combination, really, of prisoner of war camp. German soldiers were there, and some displaced people who were slave labor, former slave labor of Germany, who were mostly Slavic people. There again, there were some Russians, there were some Polish people, quite a few Russian people, Hungarians as well.
And their health couldn't have been very good.
In what sense?
I mean, after what they had gone through.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they weren't young, healthy people.
No.
They were malnourished and ill.
And maltreated, and that's right. I could do very little. It was mostly, I think, a matter that the United States Army, at least, was trying to do what they could do the best under given circumstances. So they provided so-called medical care, but I had no supplies to speak of. There were too many people. It was overwhelming.
Yes.
And we had a first aid station set up for acute emergencies, and that was basically what we tried to do.
And did you have supplies to give them better nutrition?
Some, limited, very limited, Mostly GI food, you know, sea rations, that type of food. Very little fresh food.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we stop here, since we're in our last couple of minutes, and let's put in a new tape. George, would you tell us about this photograph?
Yes. This photograph is particularly significant to me because it was taken by one of my friends at the time when we knew that Germany was about to surrender, about to collapse.
I can hold that for you so that you can concentrate.
And it was taken just outside of Nuremberg when we had large groups of German soldiers and units surrendering because they were aware that war was lost and it was about the end of their battle.
And who are the people in the photograph?
We were given this German swastika flag that this particular bunch had as in the process of surrender. The people in the photograph is myself in the center, helping to hold up the flag. On the right side of me is Leon, the close friend, the staff sergeant. We talked about him.
It's him?
Yeah, that's right, the fellow who now has a lung cancer.
And what's his last name?
Simon.
Leon Simon.
Leon Simon.
Okay.
And on the left of me is Billy, my only and favorite Jeep driver. Being a commander of our detachment, I was assigned a driver and a Jeep, and he is the one who also became a close, I would say, buddy of mine, mostly because I felt for him. He wanted to be in the Army, volunteered, but he lied about his, I think, age as well as inability to read and write. He was illiterate, so I had to, for instance, write letters for him to his mother, or read them to him when he got letters from her, which wasn't very often. We didn't get mail very often. That was a rare occasion. When we were in combat, we didn't have any mail.
Where was he from?
He was from Kentucky, from the hills of Kentucky.
And his last name?
Billy, I forget, I think it was like Campbell.
Okay.
All I remember, basically, I always thought of Billy, just Billy. I never bothered to remember his last name. And he died rather early after the war was over. I don't know what from, but he went back into the hills of Kentucky.
Hmm.
Maybe
And he never had a pair of shoes
That's right.
until he entered the Army.
he never owned a pair of shoes. The first pair he told me he ever had quite a good time trying on and wearing them and so on. And
Hmm.
it was quite an experience to get to know Billy.
Uh-huh. Yeah, what a contrast between those two gentlemen.
Yes. Or Leon was from Louisville, Kentucky, not the hills of Kentucky, but Louisville, Kentucky. He was partially college educated, very bright, very alert person who had all kinds of shoes and clothing, and came from fairly well-to-do family.
Hmm.
It's of interest, our battalion that I was with, majority of enlisted men, they were drafted and enlisted and went together as more or less as a unit. They were mostly from Kentucky and Tennessee. Most of the officers, including myself, were from elsewhere.
Hmm. Yeah.
The commanding officer of our battalion, a graduate engineer, was from Chicago, for example, Illinois.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about, your wife shared with me a little bit ago that you carried some very special medical supplies in your Jeep, Rhine wine. What medical purpose did that have?
Well, it was probably as effective, taken in proper amounts, as phenobarbital or barbiturates to calm the nerves, but we also used it for recreational purposes. There's very little really fun we can have. What we did, which of course we try to hide that fact from authorities, we emptied our 5-gallon water cans. Yes, I remember in Bingen where they had some nice wine cellars, Rhine wine, filled it with wine instead of water, so we drank wine instead of water for quite a while, but yeah, that's off record.
I understand that the Russians used to carry vodka in their canteens.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after the war, you returned home. You tried to get a residency in surgery, and no surgical residencies were available, and you ended up taking a residency in psychiatry.
That's right.
What was the draw of psychiatry for you?
Well, I had about 3 months of psychiatric residency training at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center as part of my internship. So I had little introduction to psychiatric field. Then I had to deal with a lot of psychological problems that arose during combat, mostly combat area time, and acute cases. It kind of got me somewhat interested in the field of psychiatry. I'm not sure why or how it came about that I was assigned temporarily right after the war ended to assist psychiatrists in a psychiatric, what we would call today, psychiatric unit of a Nuremberg General Hospital, where they had psychiatric casualties who were bad enough to be hospitalized.
Right.
And so I had further exposure to psychiatric problems. And after I couldn't get into the field of surgery, a friend of mine got into psychiatric residency training, and he encouraged me to get into it. His idea was that somehow, I'm not sure why, he felt I would make a good psychiatrist. So I applied and I got in, and I really got turned on by it, and I practiced psychiatry most of the time, private practice of psychiatry for 44 years to be accurate, in Detroit metropolitan area. Royal Oak, Michigan is where I spend most of my time as a psychiatrist, private practice. But for a while I worked, like you did, for a VA regional office in the capacity of psychiatrist and a psychological team, which consists of psychologists, psychiatrists, and a psychiatric social worker. And we treated mostly, of course, all of our patients were veterans.
Right.
And they were all suffering from psychiatric problems. A lot of them were post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosed.
How do you think your military experience affected the rest of your life?
That's a very difficult question to answer, because I struggle with the same question and I have not really come up with a truly definitive answer. What I believe that before I went into military service, I was somehow more, what shall we say, tender. This kind of hardened me and made somewhat of a, I hate to say it, more of a, maybe by comparison with previous life experiences, more callous to human suffering. You know, I think as I hear about, you know, suffering of people in Africa dying of starvation, or people being killed in Iraq, civilians particularly, as well as military, of course, that I remain kind of distanced from it, because seeing what I saw during combat and seeing people, so many people, dead people on the ground, it just does something to leave a lasting effect, you know. But I think I worked out of that.
Yeah, yeah. But that seems to me a very natural effect of what you went through. If you hadn't developed those emotional calluses, you might have had a nervous breakdown yourself. I mean, you really need to toughen up in order to do the job that you were there to do. But one of the unfortunate results, I think, is that later on the defenses continue,
Yes.
even when you no longer need them.
Right. That's true. It's a very good point. That they kind of live on, continue on, even beyond the necessary time when they are of some help, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other observations, wearing your psychiatrist hat, about war, about what you experienced then?
Well, I'm speaking from kind of my personal, I
Yes.
think, experience. As a result of it, I believe it made me grow up faster.
Yeah.
In terms of assuming responsibilities. There were times when I resented that because I felt I had too many grave responsibilities at too young of an age, you know. But then, you know, as life went on, I gladly jumped into the mainstream life stream and assumed responsibilities as a physician, as a husband, as a father, and so on, as a citizen above all. Yes. But in my case, as I may conclude, I think we're nearing that point, what was very important that I am very, very grateful to be a citizen of this country because I had no country when I came here. I was born in a foreign country, the country where if you're born there, you're not a citizen there, non-citizen. That's different from USA. And I'll never forget, I applied as soon as I could. It took some time for citizenship, but it took 5 years, you know, to get your papers to be naturalized. When I was assigned finally to Fort George Meade, prior to being shipped to or sent to Port of Embarkation in New York, they knew, the personnel people knew I was not officially a citizen of the United States, and I was assigned already to replacement combat duty to follow, so that they took me to Baltimore Federal Court in front of a judge who said some things to me. One that I'll never forget. They were giving me citizenship papers because I was going into combat duty. That was my future assignment, and I was being shipped to England for that purpose. And the judge asked me, "Are you ready to die for your country?" And I said, "Of course, that's my only country." That's very important.
Yes.
To me.
Well,
I'm very grateful. That's a wonderful country.
I would like to thank you sincerely for talking with me today and opening up your heart and your memories, and thank you most of all for your service to your adopted country. I'm very proud to call you a fellow citizen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.